Hi, everyone. I'm Ken Mockamy. I'm senior partner at Parux, and this is my partner, Cesar Keller. He's our CEO. And Cesar, why don't you tell us a little bit about Parux and the Five Club?
Sure. So, Parix, obviously, we're a digital product studio out of St. Louis, Missouri, and we love building custom applications, two-sided marketplaces, mobile apps. Really, anytime one of our customers or prospects come to us and for some reason off-the-shelf software doesn't work, we're obviously happy to have that conversation. And then the context is, besides it being a software project, it's a product, right? So we consider ourselves a product company. So there's more to that product. It's actually adjacent, or it's a strategic business in a box, if you will. So there's lots of different forms that take place when we help these particular initiatives out. So very excited. And we're always talking about what the best of the best product teams do. Obviously, there's some statistics that we've shared with our audience before, whether it be CB Insights or MIT research and other case studies out there. 95% of products fail out there when they're introduced to the market. So even though that's a hefty percentage, we like to focus on, well, what do the teams that are the 5%, what are they doing that's so different? And let's learn from those teams and let's share those insights and provide value through this webinar series, which we're calling the Five Club. So I'll turn it over back to you. You can tell them what the topic of the day is, and we can dive right in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cesar. So today we're going to talk about discovery, the importance of it, and really three dimensions of discovery that we think are important that we wanted to cover, and some mistakes that many founders and product teams make when it comes to discovery. Some of the pain points that we wanted to talk about today too include how, for example, how the founder thinks they represent the entire market when they don't, and how that's a major pain point. And how you can sometimes you try to pick and solve for the entire market. So you try to build this giant platform that does all of these things, when maybe picking a subset of the market might be good, and some techniques to handle that. And then one of the things that I think is really important are the unknowns that happen after products launch. Well, they shouldn't have to happen after products launch, but it's the things that are discovered afterward that can either kill a product completely, or at least hinder its growth, keep you from scaling. So those are the things that we wanted to talk about today. So Cesar, I think you wanted to tell a story about a customer that uh, didn't do discovery correctly, and how that impacted their growth.
Well, it kind of covered a couple of your pain points, so I thought it might be adequate to mention it. And that's we have sometimes stakeholders that listen, they are experts in what they do. They're subject matter experts, so they know a lot of information, a lot of details. But rather than actually getting customers involved and still going through that customer empathy phase and falling in love with the problem, they seem to think that they know exactly what the user thinks. And they're like, no, we don't need to do that. I'm the perfect avatar. Just interview me and we'll be good to go. And while it's awesome that a stakeholder can have that kind of knowledge, it's a mistake to represent them as the entire user base that's going to be using the product. There are so many different things from a culture perspective, from a psychographic perspective, different levels of technology, different backgrounds, different disciplines. There's always things that you can do to learn. And it's not like you have to interview thousands and thousands of customers. There's a smart way to interview the right amount and still have a productive set of R&D and analysis and documentation that can help support that. So the story goes as simple as, hey, I need to cut all of that stuff. I want to save time, energy, and money. We actually build something based on specs of one person, thinking that that's the entire market. And then we launch, and then we have customer tell us, well, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't do that. And then here we are wishing we could have said, we told you so. It's just one of those things. Even though you go into these particular initiatives with intuition, that's great. But let's not do that as a methodology, right? Let's actually do things based on need. Let's leverage data and spot checking that with some good customer-centric design and talking to customers. That's always the best way to do it. And that's a mistake that other people shouldn't make.
Absolutely, and we get this all the time. We talk to a lot of founders, and they want to build a product, or they're building a product, and they need some help. Maybe they're even struggling with traction at that point, and you do a little have a discussion with them, and you ask the question, "What kind of discovery did you do?" and across the market or across, their customers, their users. And very often the answer is very little. Oh, well, we know who they are, like just what you were talking about. And the chances of success, if you don't really fully understand not just your customer, but also the market and also the hidden variables, your chances of success go way, way down. So let's talk a
There's
little
another
bit.
story I'd like to tell on the flip side, though,
Yeah.
and that is, I think a lot of people have heard of the story of Henry Ford, right? That basically he was building the car, and he's like, if I would have asked everyone what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? So, there is something about innovation. There is something about having an aha moment, and sometimes as a visionary, you can see things that other people don't see, or just they just can't imagine, right? So on the flip side, that's another reason why you get customers involved, but you yourself can still push the innovation. I remember going out on some meetings with a couple of our team in a new project, and one of the applications or one of the challenges is that they had so many applications that they had to use to go through a workflow. And when we sat down with the user, they had their browser open, they had like 17 tabs open, and they showed us this is how we get all the work done. So when we just simply ask them without, trying to assume any solution, they're like, so what do you think would help you? Their answer was, man, if I had a second monitor, this would really help me because I could see way more tabs rather than thinking, you know what, instead of 17 different applications, why don't we narrow that down to maybe 3 or 4 and you can get a lot of space back besides a monitor. So I just wanted to tell the other side of it, right? It's always in balance, but I think that's a pretty unique story that sometimes customers can't see all the details. But that's why you need to spot check, and that's why you need to talk to a variety of customers.
That's a great point. And when we talk to clients, we don't want to just talk to the owners, the managers, the C-level people. We want to talk to the people that are actually working in the field on the product day after day, on their platforms, what of those are, and looking for what their pain points are, what their problems are. That's really the essence of good discovery. And so speaking of that, I want to talk a little bit about what we're calling the three dimensions of discovery. And this is something that we came up with recently. It's really customer discovery. It's about the customer and the market and what you do there. And then the last one, which we think is really important, are the hidden barriers. What are those that can stunt your growth or even kill a startup? So you really have to do all three of those. And I know that's kind of simplistic. There's a lot of elements to each one of those, but we thought that that was a really good way to kind of group them together. So let's talk a little bit about the customer first. Cesar, do you want to talk a little bit about how empathy plays into the customer discovery process and how we uncover pain points and uncover problems that are worthwhile solving?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to one basic essence, and that is, can you walk inside of the shoes of somebody else? So rather than just being sympathetic, you're trying to feel their pain and you're trying to like be in the same boat rowing next to them, going, okay, how do we make this a lighter load? How do we make this better? Um, if you go a little bit deeper than that, it's not just saying, "Oh, tell us all the problems and the headaches with the current product," because they can obviously spit out everything that they hate. But I think it's also good to call out all the good. There might be some good things with the current application or what they're using, saying this is done really well. So just asking the questions, what's the good? What's the bad? What's the ugly? Let's get in there. And ultimately, I think it's just delaying the starting to talk about solutions. It is the physical presence of, I'm going to make sure that I fully understand the problems before I start throwing solutions into the mix. And that just takes a little bit of discipline, right? Not only that, it's understanding that not all products fit one exact brand persona or user persona. It can be a mix, right? With any piece of software. Let's talk about one of the pieces of software I've used for a long, long time, Adobe Photoshop. It's used by designers. It's used by photographers. There's different kinds of designers that use it. It's got 3D modeling now. It can be used for rendering some low-based
Generative AI.
animations. It now all the AI stuff is coming along. You can write a whole bunch of macros and processing workflows. I mean, if you know 90% of Photoshop, you're in the 1%, right? So just think about all the different people from beginners learning to different types of designers to people that use it every day. It's crazy, right? So even though it's one application, the amount and types of users, you need to think through that a little bit, right? So it's almost like a matrix of different user profiles. And when you're thinking about features and you're thinking about how to change this and how to make this successful, you can't just be one dimensional. So that's one way to also think about not just having empathy, but having empathy at multiple stages or multiple journeys. I think
Mhm.
that's really important. And then the last one is kind of like, there's what we call founder's bias, which we've mentioned a little bit, right? And that's like just because you're really intuitive and smart and been a part of this world, you still don't have the shared voice to speak on behalf of everyone. So you still have to spot check, you still have to have strategy, and you still have to document based on all these backgrounds and gaps and behaviors and intelligence and all that. So it comes down to discipline, comes down to hard work, and it comes to having some kind of foundation that you're giving everybody the opportunity to share. This is what's good. This is what's bad. And then just like we talked about the Henry Ford story, is there still has to be a space for innovation, meaning sometimes customers might not know how to imagine it. They might not know how to speak it in certain words. And you are there to push the envelope and truly innovate while adhering to all those standards. So much going on whenever you want to talk about user-centric design approaches. But I think that's if you talk about the top 5% of product teams, they really, really care about it because they want to validate that the value of what their product is doing is really strong. And you can't do that without having that shared voice.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think one of the things that's really difficult when it comes to customer discovery is not only solving a problem, but is the problem compelling enough and big enough that it's worthwhile solving? Just solving problems alone does not necessarily guarantee success. And we see that all the time. And that's, you have to get past that, and that's not an easy thing to do, is to evaluate whether or not the solution that the problem you're solving, that your solution is good enough to make it worthwhile. And if it's not, just solving it, you just get a shrug of the shoulders and somebody says it's not worth my time and trouble. So those are the things that you have to get to. The other thing that I wanted to mention too is that very often founders are interacting with early adopters, those people that are real evangelists for your product that you're trying to develop. They're fantastic. You really need those people. The problem is that if you don't go past them, if you're just looking at your early adopters and you don't get to your mass market people, the people that really represent your main users, if you think that those early adopters are going to represent those people, you could really wind up with a lot of sluggish growth. And there's so many products that the early adopters are very excited about it. They're telling you it's gonna be a fantastic product, and then you get a very lackluster response when you get into the market. So that's why that deeper discovery with enough customers and enough critical mass of users to give you the right feedback, so that when you do launch your product, that you know that it is actually solving a problem. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I think this is something that we've written about before and talk about a lot, is the solution fixation trap. It's the idea that you come into a scenario where you've got this solution that you're trying to present. And you touched on it a minute ago, that you were talking about how when you're talking to your users, you can't be presenting solutions. And even if you don't do that, if you've got this solution in mind and you don't let go of it and don't have the ability to pivot from that, you can wind up just building something to your idea of what the solution should be when it may not be aligned with the customer's needs at all. And so those are some really serious problems that mistakes that you make during discovery and that you have to avoid. So let's
Yeah,
move
one
on
of
to the
the
market.
Yeah, just a quick comment before
Oh
we
yeah,
do
go
that.
ahead.
I'd like to call out a word for what you're saying. That's just perspective, right? Um, when you think about it, a solution kind of has a bias built into a certain perspective. And sometimes you can look at something from different vantage points and come up with a totally different solution just by looking at the problem a different way.
Hmm.
And that's call that creative or call that being disciplined to make sure that you are truly looking at the problem from multiple angles. But that's exactly what that solution fixation trap is all about. It's remaining open and making sure that you truly understand the problem so you can turn it around and look at it from different ways, and to do that with different people and different mindsets and different problem solving skills. But yeah, let's move on to the next one. The market is it's a juicy topic all to itself.
It really is. So, Cesar, why don't you talk a little bit about market analysis and versus market research, the difference between those two, and how important those things are. You come from a marketing background, you've got some deep experience there, so share a little bit about that, please.
Well, I'll start with market research, and I think we both sat around before this webinar, and we were just talking about, what things to discuss. And I think one of the things we always talk about is when people are excited and they come to us and they share their initial documentation for us to get involved. A lot of the times, the analysis that they've done or the research that they've done is very high level surface. It rarely ever goes deep, and we have tools like the internet, and we now have ChatGTP, and we can ask these bots and search engines almost anything that we want and get some quick level answers type of a thing. But I think we all know that if you want to dig deep and you really want to get into some data, that is hard work, right? And I think the first part is the researching side, which is, how accurate is the information? Because as you know, just because you find things on the internet does not make them accurate. That's part number one. Part number two is just, yeah, how deep you're willing to go. What are your sources and how to verify those sources, and maybe how to get samplings from different sources, and how do you normalize all that information? That's very difficult to do, especially if you don't have technical skills. You're playing around with data, you're playing around with research, and it can be time consuming. Now, the analysis side is to me, is kind of a two-sided equation, right? You can start analyzing data right away, but what if you're analyzing the wrong data? Then whatever results that you're going to get is automatically going to be skewed, right? So I think if the first part of differentiating is the research and the data itself is just raw information. The analysis and breaking down that to make better informed decisions, you're converting that raw data into
Mm.
useful information. And there's so many steps that can go wrong if you don't have those procedures, down packed. The other thing is it's very difficult to grab analysis for an entire market. I mean, you even said it yourself, right? As one of the pain points is that you think one user or one kind of workflow or one solution, it fits the entire market. And that is not true.
Oh.
It's a matrix, right? It's like so many factors go in, but once you start breaking down a market into sub segments and those segments into sub users and those sub users into user types, and you start doing the breakdown, there is a lot that goes into the analysis, and it's just not straightforward. So when you're using the power of all that information, you got to be very, very careful as to what outcomes or what results you're going to preach, because sometimes that data might be very, very skewed. So I know you can probably add more to that, but I'll start with those.
Yeah, that could be a really deep topic, and we could do entire workshops across that very easily. But the one of the things that I also wanted to touch on was the competition. And very often when somebody comes in with an idea, we ask them questions about what competition they have, and very often people will say, "Well, we have no competition." Um, that's always a red flag because the reality is, of course, there's competition. Even if they're not using a platform or they're using multiple platforms, they have a solution that they're using, even if it's manual. There is a solution to their problem. It's what their status quo is. So, but having a deep understanding of the competition, who they are, what they're doing, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and also what their capacity is to swat you. You know, just because you come up with a new idea, if there's a major, competitor that has a large share of the market, there's nothing unless you've got some IP protection to keep them from just, ripping off your idea, your product, and just incorporating it into them. So that's one of the things that we see a lot of is that, just not digging deep enough in the competition, really understanding what their strengths and weaknesses are, and how you can find opportunities to take advantage of their weaknesses. One of the things that's actually very interesting is that competitors in an entrenched market or that are have a large market share very often are reluctant to adopt and innovate because that tends to disrupt their current customer base. So you see that very often that they're reluctant to make changes, and because every time they do, their customer support channels light up with problems and questions and all of that. So a lot of times you see competition that just is not being very innovative just because it causes a lot of friction with their teams. So understanding what those dynamics are, I think it can be some real opportunities there.
Yeah, one of the things that you wrote down in our notes is like riches in the niches. All right, right. So a niche is a very important thing. Let's how we equate it to market. We always talk about if you're trying to build an MVP, how many people just make the mistake of I'm going to design and build this thing for this entire market. But we just talked about how markets have segments. Each of those market segments have different kinds of users. Each one of those users can have different profiles. So if you're trying to build an MVP for that entire market, you're kind of taking a huge chunk and a huge piece, and you're kind of betting on that huge piece rather than breaking it down a little bit and going, you know what? Here's the market segments. Out of all these segments, I'm going to be super smart. I'm going to pick this segment first. And this is the one that we're going to start with. We call that a beachhead market, right? And out of that beachhead, here's the users, here's the profile. So I'm just trying to solve this problem in this stage at this size right now, as opposed to here's my MVP. It's trying to solve all these things. Now it's bloated with all these functionality and all these sub features that you might not even need because it's not even validated. The cost and energy to do that is huge. Whereas you could have taken a faster path and a faster path to market because you had to solve less things. And as you're learning through that journey, you're learning a ton of other things because if you're iterating, prototyping, and caring about the customer, you're going to be feeding yourself over time to fight that next battle instead of trying to win the war, right? And I think it pins into the next two kind of things that you talk about, which is trends, finding the opportunities and minimizing the risks inside of those sub markets. And then can you even access that market? Why would you try to launch a product in a market that you don't even have access to, or it's going to be super expensive or super time consuming, right? So just being strategic as to how you sit down and go, I'm not going to try to conquer the entire world or the market as a whole, and just breaking it down, that's being mature. That's being, okay, I'm going to be realistic about this.
Mhm.
And eventually my goal is to conquer the entire market. But for right now, I got to make sure I balance this and I'm very realistic with what I'm trying to pursue. That right there, so many insights, so easy to say, but so many people skip all that and they just want to go bang for
Yeah.
buck and go for the whole war. So I don't know. You've had these conversations with a lot of prospects with me, so
Oh yeah.
I'm preaching to the choir here.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about niche markets. There is so many opportunities for niches. And for example, Airbnb is huge. We have a few major competitors like VRBO and some others as well. But there are a slew of other travel websites that cater to certain subgroups, LGBTQ, pet lovers, adventurers, all of those
Golfers.
kind of, yeah, what's that? Golfers, exactly. So there are those are subgroups that can actually be very, very profitable. And a lot of times founders have got their eye on, becoming this, the next unicorn with, a multi-billion dollar market. And that does happen. You certainly can do that. But there's some real power in flying under the radar and serving the needs of a sub-market where you'll have less competition and you'll be able to enjoy the that access to that market a lot easier. And it's also easier to connect with them. Very often, those subgroups, those niches, have communities that allow you to connect very directly with them through social media and other channels. And you don't have that opportunity with mass market. It can be very expensive to market to the entire world.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into the third dimension, which is hidden barriers. And this is, I mean, frequently known as the unknowns. You weren't aware that that even existed. So we
Oh,
had no idea that blah, 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 blah. And you definitely, as you said earlier in the webinar, you definitely don't want to learn about that after you've launched. But that's what happens when people kind of just go quickly. They don't take the discovery serious. They find all these problems after the fact. And that's not where we want to be. So let's have the structure and discipline to figure out not all of it. It's impossible to figure everything out.
you can't.
But do you have a good enough process to make sure that the main gotchas are totally made aware to you earlier on? I think that's important.
It's critically important. And so many times I've talked to founders that have got a product in the market. It's demonstrably better. It's solving a problem. It serves a need. It had evangelists and early adopters that were crazy about it, and yet it still failed to get traction for a variety of reasons. And uncovering those is not always easy, but it is critically important. You have to think beyond just the problem you're solving and your product. One of the things that's very critical, and we've run into this a number of times with smaller startups that are trying to crack the market into Fortune 500 companies, maybe whether it's healthcare or finance or whatever, and they're finding they're running into all kinds of barriers. They did their market research, they did their customer research, they went through and did interviews, and they did prototyping, and they proved that their product would have a need and have adoption. But then when they try to sell in, leadership says no, we're not going to buy because it's too young of a company. We're not going to bet the farm on a small company that's only been in business for 2 or 3 years with a small team of 6 people, and so they run into those kinds of barriers. And if you're building a product that is going to target those markets, you have to be in it for the long haul. You have to be able to build your market with smaller, or build your user base with smaller companies, go for that smaller market, and then work up to that. But you can't crack you can't go into a medical healthcare network that's, multi-billion-dollar network and sell them a piece of software when you don't have a track record, if you haven't been around very long. And some of those companies, by the way, this is not necessarily hidden in a way. Very often those companies have got very strict security requirements. They've got size requirements. How long have you been in business? How big is your team? What's your revenue? They want to know all of these things. Those are things that they publish and talk about. So having discussions with leadership prior to launching a product or building a product is a great idea. So you at least are aware of what those hurdles are, and you can figure out strategies to get around those. But you can't just build it and then, oops, I didn't know that. And this happens all the time, as you mentioned. Very often, we see somebody say, well, yeah, we had no idea that da 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 da, and we just weren't able to get traction. And it's very, very frustrating.
One of the aspects that we talk about is even if your product is better, right, or it's achieving more results, faster results, or more convenient, or whatever the value proposition might be, it doesn't mean that your product is going to be selected. So we talk about switching costs, meaning someone's already using something, or they're in love with something, or that's what they're used to using, and you introduce your new product. There is a switching cost of going from what I'm using now to your proposed new solution. Why don't you give me just a little bit of highlights of switching costs? Because this is something that a lot of people just don't, it's not necessarily common sense. They just think, well, obviously this is a better product. Why wouldn't you just use it? But talk to me a little bit about those switching costs. I think those are important.
Yeah, it really is important, and it's one that really shoots down a lot of products. The pain, it can be almost a formula. You can ask the question, is the pain of switching to my product less than the pain of their current solution, whatever that is? And if the answer is, not affirmative, then you don't have a chance to get traction, or stunt your traction. And we see this all the time. There's also things like networks that surround a particular competitor, and they may have an entire network of users that are using that product, and maybe even social channels that are associated with that particular competitor. And switching to your product very often means that you have to give up that network And people don't want to do that. So that's a huge barrier to entry. I saw one, I've already told the story in a previous webinar, but I think it's really apropos, is they built an entire product that had the community built into the product as opposed to the competitor that had a Facebook group, which was closed. And they, they had thousands and thousands of users were in that Facebook group. And what they didn't anticipate, and which they should have anticipated, is that in order to switch to their new product, they would have to get everybody to switch at once or almost everyone. Otherwise, you would lose that network. So if you had just switched, a couple of people had switched over, you'd have lost access to that network. And that kind of problem or barrier should be anticipated and should be thought through. So he made the mistake of building that product, and that was a huge, huge mistake.
I think that's even compounded with the fact that we call it, whenever we build a digital application, you want it to be as sticky as possible, meaning you want people to stay in your environment. You want everything to be available to them to some degree, so that they don't need to leverage anything else out there, as opposed to I'm going to use this in coordination with multiple apps. So it's okay to share apps and whatnot. Those are two different perspectives altogether. I mean, let's take Airbnb and VRBO, right? Those are two different, totally different services. I know I've used both. There are most of the times we use Airbnb, but sometimes it's not the right accommodation, the wrong fit, the wrong price, or whatever. So we look at the other one. You can talk about Uber versus Lyft, same kind of environment, but ultimately, someone came first, someone was second, and someone's like, oh my God, look at all the power that they have, but they still thought, okay, we want to compete with that market. So there's just so much that goes into it. And all we're saying is do your research, do your homework, so that if there are intrinsic, barriers that are going to truly, truly block you, that you don't find out this information too late. Let's get it early on, and let's put some strategy together for it, because that can make or break the success for you, knowing that all these products are super hyper competitive. They take teams to build, and it's not it's not cheap. So you definitely don't want to lose out by not being strategic.
And that's exactly it. You're never going to uncover all of the barriers. You just can't do it. There's some things that pop up. We've run into that ourselves where we've made assumptions that seemed very obvious at the time, and yet when you got into it, there was nuance to it that made what seemed obvious not so obvious. But that's the more you do, the more you understand who your users are, and what those barriers are and what the market wants, the better chance you have of success. And to just plow forward without really understanding what potential barriers might be is a huge, huge risk, and we just see it all the time.
Well, I think
So,
we've uncovered three
yeah,
main aspects, like you put it, three dimensions, right? Listen, product teams that are serious about what they're doing, they're going to include their customers, and they're going to go as deep as they can. And before assigning any solution, they're going to achieve that empathy, and they're going to fall in love with the root of the problem. We know that for a fact. Uh, as far as the market, we know that the top 5% of product teams out there, they're not going to try to boil the ocean. They're not going to design an MVP for an entire market. They're going to pick a very strategic head market by sub-segmenting and understanding the users and demographics and psychographics inside of that market. And they're going to try to own it, where there be a niche or like a partial of that segment, because they're going to reduce risk and learn a lot as they go through their product life cycle. And lastly, they're going to try to uncover as many barriers as they possibly can. But through iteration, through having maturity and being disciplined and doing their homework, very few teams are going to be caught completely off guard. And no, there's no way to have zero risk. We do this because it's a business and it's a calculated risk, but calculated risks mean doing your homework. So this is what the teams that are successful are doing. We hope that you enjoyed our conversation and got some value out of it, and look to see you soon on the next webinar that we have.
thank you, Cesar.
Yep. Have a good one.
You too.